Hello and welcome to this, the second of the videos that deal with the historical development of the Enneagram. This time it's about the development of the Enneagram symbol itself, whereas in the previous video we were looking at the roots of some of the ancient wisdom and the ideas that are incorporated into and are symbolized, and the cosmic laws that are symbolized by the Enneagram. So in this video I'm going to start by backtracking a little bit to Pythagoras and his sacred geometry before I go on to show how these ideas were taken up by early Christian mystics and the Desert Fathers in particular, and somebody called Evagrius Ponticus, and how these ideas then were communicated into Western Christianity and the Eastern monasticism and their sort of ideas and practices were brought across into medieval Europe, and then the ideas were developed further there. There's the influence of the Fibonacci sequence. There's a dip into the Templars, the Knights Templar, and their connection with the Sufis that they met and encountered in Jerusalem. There's a little dip into the idea of the golden ratio, Chartres Cathedral, that the Knights Templar were involved in. And then Ramón Lull, a very important person who began to put the passions of that were talked about by the Desert Fathers as well into a shape that began to be the precursor of the passions as developed in the modern personality Enneagram. And then further on into the ideas of Cabala, the tree of life. And so it's going to be an interesting journey that we take together in this video. So sacred geometry, which we need to go back to, is the belief that certain geometric shapes and patterns have spiritual or divine significance. Now, these shapes are believed to have been used by ancient cultures in the construction of their sacred buildings and temples, especially you can see that in Egypt, of course, and are also found in nature. So Pythagoras believed that geometric shapes and patterns could be used to understand the fundamental principles of the universe, and he taught that the universe was built on mathematical principles and that everything in the world could be explained using geometry and numbers. One of Pythagoras' most famous contributions to sacred geometry is the Pythagorean theorem. This theorem is not only a fundamental principle of mathematics, but it is also a geometric principle that can be used to construct right triangles and other shapes. And so although it was named after this Greek philosopher, the theorem is actually much older. And so, for instance, several Babylonian clay tablets dating to between 1900 and 1600 BC show some knowledge of the theory. And it's also mentioned in the Indian Shulba Sutras, which were written between 800 and 400 BC. So nevertheless, the association with this theorem with the Pythagoreans is quite apt, actually, because they seem to have been particularly interested in triangles. It's little wonder then that the Pythagoreans came up with a triangle-based symbol in sacred geometry known as the tetractis or the tetractis of the decad. Tetractis meaning 4 and the decad meaning 10. This symbol consists of 10 dots arranged in 4 rows, thus forming an equilateral triangle. The tetractis is full of symbolic meaning. For example, each row of dots is supposed to contain a hidden meaning. The first row, which has a single dot, is said to represent the active principle, or the divine power behind all creation, the one, if you like. The second, the passive principle, or matter. The third, the world, proceeding from the union of the active and passive principles, the anima and animus principles, the masculine and the feminine principles. And the fourth, the 4 liberal arts and sciences that complete the world. Now this is of particular importance to, or relevance to, the triangle in the Enneagram, which represents the law of three, the law governing how anything new emerges in the universe, as we shall see if you attend my course. So apart from the triangle, many other shapes have been imbued with symbolic meaning, making them part of sacred geometry. Like the triangle, these shapes may have different meanings attached to them, depending on the contexts in which they were produced. The circle, for example, is found in various cultures around the world, and therefore it contains multiple meanings. The Pythagoreans, for instance, perceived the circle as a symbol of unity, oneness, and indivisibility. For Zen Buddhists, the circle is a simple symbol of enlightenment, whilst the Chinese regard the shape of the symbol as a symbol of the heavens. And in addition, the circle is almost universally used as a symbol for the sun. And in modern astronomy, this heavenly body is represented as a circle with a dot in the middle. So circles may be repeated, though, in order to create new symbols. One of these, for instance, is the vesica piscis, literally meaning bladder of a fish, which is formed by intersecting two circles with the same radius. The two circles intersect in such a way that the center of each circle touches the perimeter of the other. And the intersection of the two circles in the vesica piscis is said to represent a mutual understanding, a shared vision, or common ground between the two equal individuals. The vesica piscis, in turn, may be repeated in order to produce more symbols. So 6 vesica pisci, I should say, not piscis, I don't know, arranged radially around a central circle, or 6 circles fitting around a seventh, all of which are the same radius, produces a 6-petaled rosette, known as the seed of life. And since this symbol contains 7 circles, it has been interpreted to represent the process of creation. That also has relevance to the law of 7, which I talk about in my course. So by repeating the 6-petaled rosette, another symbol, the flower of life, may be produced. And the flower of life is a very ancient symbol. It's depicted in various sacred sites around the world. And for some, this symbol represents the divine, the mathematical order of the universe. And it is, incidentally, the basis for the Cabala's tree of life symbol, which is, I will say more about later. So, in addition to these contributions, Pythagoras also believed in the power of music and the relationship between sound and geometry. And he believed that musical harmonies could be explained using mathematical principles, and that music and geometry, and in particular arithmology of the Tetractys, were intimately connected. Now, I won't go into the details of that and show you how, but this is of particular relevance to the Enneagram, for the law of 7, symbolized by the hexad of crisscrossing lines that connect numbers 1, 4, 2, 8, 5, and 7, are, as you will see, if you certainly as I explain, if you register for the Enneagram of Cosmic Laws, based on the arithmology of the Tetractys and music. Now, I need to pick up from where I left off in the last video, when we looked at how all these ideas were feeding into the academic circles in Alexandria, and how they influenced Christian academics and theologians such as Origen. But there was a lot more going on in 3rd century Egypt than the pursuit of academic knowledge. Now, the ancients, all of them, from way back, integrated intellectual ways of knowing with a much more direct way of knowing. Gnosis, this is about experiences and experiential knowledge and participatory knowledge. So what is clear is that in the ancient world, people could and did, through practice, have experiences of dissolving into the union with the ultimate divine one. Now, of course, all the names for God in the ancient Middle Eastern languages, Allah, Allah, El, mean the one. And this is what mystics desire above all else. They long to have a sense of communion with the divine. Plotinus, a contemporary of Origen's and obviously studied with him at Alexandria, the University in Alexandria under Ammonius Saccas, called it henosis, which a term to which I think I'm going to return much later in the third video when we see how these ideas fed into the modern Enneagram. So it's not surprising that besides being the home of the early Christian theological development, Egypt is also the home of early Christian mystics. So people went into the desert to meditate, contemplate and pray to seek that experiential knowledge. And this is where desert fathers and mothers set up their monasteries. So Evagrius, the son of a bishop, was born in the year 345 in Ibora. It's in the province of Pontus, modern-day Georgia, although there's some dispute about his place of birth. But anyway, he was called, therefore, Evagrius Ponticus. After he was ordained at the age of 34, he went to pursue an ecclesiastical career in Constantinople, but following a disastrous affair with a married woman, he left his promising ecclesiastical career and travelled to Jerusalem, where in 383 he became a monk. He then went to Egypt and spent the remaining years of his life in a hermitage in the Nitrian desert that lies between Cairo and Alexandria. So like Origen before him, and Evagrius was sort of followed him, Evagrius used the numerology of Pythagoras to interpret scripture. Of particular importance, so far as the Enneagram symbol is concerned, is the way he used Pythagoras's or Pythagorean principles of sacred geometry to interpret the symbolic meaning of number 153, which is the number of fish caught by the disciples in the closing scene of John's Gospel, John chapter 21. And incidentally, what is the root of 153? That's it, it's 9. So Evagrius divided his treatise on prayer, which is a manual for contemplative practices, into 153 short chapters. And he gives an explanation of the significance of this number and its relation to geometric shapes in his introduction to the book. These shapes include the triangle, representing the Trinity, the hexagon, representing an orderly creation, as described in the mythology of the first creation myth in Genesis, and the circle that represents the river of earthly time, which is divided into seasons, months and days. But you cannot understand this logic without understanding Pythagorean numerical symbolism, which categorizes numbers into either triangular, square, hexagonal or circular numbers. So I'm not going to elaborate on this, but you will find it in Richard Raw and Andreas Urbert's book, The Enneagram, A Christian Perspective. It's in the first chapter that Andreas Urbert wrote. Evagrius was also a keen observer of what today we would call human psychology, observing both in himself and in his disciples the ways in which people lose a sense of the divine presence that is always and only experienced in the present moment. He and other desert fathers developed the idea of passions because these were emotional energies that arose out of a certain distinct kind of suffering. And the names that he gave these, indolence, lust, gluttony, in some of his writing, fear, avarice, envy, vanity, pride, and anger, or more accurately resentment, correspond to what is known today as the passions of the Enneagram personalities that were incorporated into what became the personality Enneagram by Oscar Ichazo. I'll say more about that in the last video dealing with the emergence of the modern Enneagram. Eventually these were whittled down by Pope Gregory the Great in the 6th century to what became known as the 7 deadly sins. He omitted fear and resentment. But by then the whole concept of sin had been tainted by this idea of original sin that St. Augustine introduced. Originally humans were not seen as inherently sinful, and salvation was not about being rescued from eternal torment in hell. Sin was a falling short of the ideal, missing the mark for sure, but it wasn't seen as a moral failing so much as a failing of consciousness. And the passions were understood as ways by which we lose touch with the sacred unity that is our birthright. The sense of being united with our original origin and essence. The original idea was that by being aware of your sin, or being aware of your tendency to leave presence, you open the way for God's grace to come in and work with you. But Evagrius never integrated his understanding of the dynamics of human personality and psychology, were often expressed in the language of his day as demons, etc., with his understanding of Pythagorean sacred geometry. A Christian monk and theologian John Cassian, 360 to 435, introduced the ideas and practices of the desert fathers and mothers in Egypt to the medieval West. He's associated with the Abbey Saint Victor in Marseille, but lived in a cave near there, which is reputed also to be where Mary Magdalene, Jesus' beloved companion, lived in her final years. He was celebrated in both the Western and Eastern churches for his mystical writings. Though we don't know how these ideas were communicated across religious divides, there seems to have been a common development of ideas amongst the mystical schools of the three Abrahamic faiths: Cabala in Judaism, Sufism in Islam, and various streams of mystical Christianity. Whilst we're talking about the beginnings of the understanding about passions and the way in which they take us out of presence, and how we have to overcome them to develop the virtues that are that arise out of our true essence of who we are, it's worth saying that these ideas probably go back to much more ancient times, and indeed you find hints of this in Homer's Odyssey. Now Homer's 600, I think it's 600 BCE or thereabouts, and of course these ideas may have been even before Homer's time, if he was the one that actually authored the poem. There's a majestic poem, the Odysseus' journey around these 9 mythic lands. And of course the number 9 is significant as well. So Beatrice Chestnut, in her book The Complete Enneagram, points to the fact that in each of the lands that or islands or whatever that Odysseus has to visit in his journey back home, he has to overcome one of these passions represented by the people that lived in that land. And of course they are passions in his own being as well. So you begin, for example, on his journey home, visiting the land of the Lotus Eaters, who represent indolence. You then goes to visit the land of the Cyclops, representing the passion of lust and a particular kind of anger. It's a lust for power, really, that gets them into problems. Then there's the Aeolians, representing gluttony. There's the Laestrygonians, representing it's fear, but it's actually counterphobic type of fear. It's a particular way of coping with fear. And then there's the avarice of Hermes and Circe. Not avarice in the normal way of understanding it, but avarice in terms of knowledge and understanding, which actually is a particular problem for the number 5 personality. And then he has this visit to Hades. I won't go into. He has to pass the land of the Sirens, representing the passion of envy. Scylla and Charybdis, representing the need in Odysseus to overcome vanity. And then he meets Calypso, who has the sort of particular tendency of pride, the pride of the two, which is really the pride of feeling that you can't be done without you. You are needed, and you need to be needed. And then there's the Phaeacians that he comes across,
The anger is not really the Ephesians, but it's the way in which Hermes, the god Hermes, deals with it. If he upsets his trip home, makes it he loses his vessel and all the rest of it. But anyway, I think it's worth mentioning that in this at this point. I do have a.
The patterning of digital roots and their relationship to sacred geometry can be found in the Fibonacci sequence as well. The next number in the Fibonacci sequence is the sum of the previous two, so you get 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, etc., as illustrated here. And conventional wisdom suggests that the Fibonacci numbers were introduced in 1202 by Leonardo of Pisa, better known today as Fibonacci, in his book Liber Abaci, which was the most influential text on mathematics produced in Europe at that time. However, Fibonacci had spent time in North Africa, where Islamic scholarship flourished, so historians have reason to surmise that he had learned it from Muslim scholars, but this fact was probably edited out by the Christian Church. In fact, it is most likely it goes all the way back to Pythagoras, who, as I said, viewed mathematics as a mystical science. If you take the first 12 numbers of the Fibonacci sequence as in the left-hand columns of this slide, and then the next 12 numbers as in the right-hand columns of this slide, you calculate the digital roots for both, and then you add the digital roots of the first 12 numbers to the digital roots of the next, and you get the digital root of 9. This is the mathematics of perfection, and 9 represents and is the symbol of perfection. And because the digital root of 12 is 3 and the digital root of 24 is 6, so we have the 3, 6 and 9 linked in the Enneagram by the inner triangle, playing out in the Fibonacci sequence as well, at least in the digital roots of it. The Fibonacci sequence matters to architecture and nature and many other things because it is felt to be the key basis of visual harmony. Every number divided by the previous number in the series gives a ratio that is extremely close to the golden ratio of 1 to 6. Indeed, the higher up you go, the closer you get to the golden ratio. Now you see this ratio in the natural world, like in the whorls of a sunflower, and in architecture, such as in Chartres Cathedral. Now, Gordon Strachan, whom I knew personally and who has since died, wrote a book entitled Chartres Cathedral, Sacred Geometry, Sacred Space. And some years before he died, I was having a meal with him and his wife when he started to tell me about some of the things he had uncovered in his research. He said that he believed that Chartres has connections with the Enneagram through the Knights Templar, who learned about it from the Sufis, with whom he had had a very good relationship in Jerusalem. Indeed, it was Sufi Masons who helped in its design, so I'm quoting from his book. The most important clue that the Templars' mission was not only to guard the pilgrim routes, but to learn from the Sufis, lies in the symbolism of the number 9. When the order was founded in 1118, there were only 9 knights, which is strange because it is obvious that 9 were far too few to be effective as protectors of pilgrims. Even more odd is the fact that no more knights were added for a further 9 years. What is overlooked is that they were already undergoing a profoundly spiritual and personal experience, and this derived from their encounters with the Sufis and other Islamic scholars whose knowledge included the higher spiritual dimensions of gnosis. And Gordon goes on to explain that this gnosis was also taught them through the Enneagram. And it's also significant that in the original design there were to be 9 towers around the cathedral.
I've already noted the possibility that Sufism has pre-Islamic roots, and that these may go back to the Chaldean sages some 4,000 years ago in Mesopotamia. And we should note that Sufism is believed by its followers to be the inner secret teaching that is concealed within every religion. And I indeed spent some time learning from a Sufi mystic who was also an academic and an expert in ancient Middle Eastern languages or in the interpretation of them. And in the group that we were learning together, there were people from all over the world and from all the Abrahamic faiths as well. Now, Fatima Christlieb refers to the work of Leila Bakhtir, an Iranian-American scholar who has researched the writings of Persian mystic and Sufi Jalal al-Din Rumi, and claims to have found evidence that he knew of the Enneagram in his famous Masnavi poem. So she presents her case for an original Sufi Enneagram in two books, Rumi's original Enneagram and the Sufi Enneagram, The Secrets of the Symbol Unveiled. She calls the Sufi Enneagram a symbolic manifestation of practical philosophy whose application in relation to human beings takes as its guiding thread the notion of the inner battle between passions and noetic faculties, that is, the ability to reason, in order to restore their transpersonal identity, which shows a close similarity, she notes, to Gurdjieff's Enneagram. Now, the Enneagram, as Gurdjieff discovered it from Sufi sources in Turkestan, is about an alchemical process whereby the earthly elements of our physical body are transformed into the gold of our true divine essence and a spiritual body, an essence which we are born with, which we're born, but it's smothered by the ego personality, which has to develop in order that we can function in this space-time world. Now, Bakhtir insists that this path of learning cannot be travelled without the language of symbols, in which the main signs are the hidden sciences of numbers, geometry, and letters. And that's just a quotation of a phrase that she uses. What is interesting about the Sufi Enneagram is that it incorporates the passions of the ego and maps a pathway to return to the virtues of one's essence. This is the focus of the modern personality Enneagram. However, it differs from the modern Enneagram that Oscar Ichazo developed in the 20th century, and here are the two placed side by side. And to examine the difference and why she calls Ichazo's amendments a catastrophic decision, you'll need to read what she says about herself. She says herself, and this is summarized by Fatima Christlieb in her book on the origins of the Enneagram.
So around that time, we find features of the Enneagram symbol in the work of Ramón Lull, 1236 to 1315. He was a Mallorcan who became a Franciscan tertiary. That's one of their lay orders after a dramatic conversion experience. He was also an alchemist, one of the mystical streams of Christianity. And he studied Hebrew and Arabic and set up language schools, mainly to facilitate the conversation between Christians, Jews and Muslims, who during the era of Moorish rule had made an impact on that island. And from the 9th until the 12th centuries, during the time when Spain was ruled by the Moors, all three faiths were learning from each other. And here there's a painting of a Moorish scholar and a Western scholar looking at studying sacred geometry together. Anyway, he used the absolute and relative qualities of God as a starting point for these conversations, but the fact that he depicted these in a diagram that is very like the Enneagram symbol is evidence that he may have picked them up from the Sufis. Now, Fatima Christlieb points out that in his book Arbor Scientiae, that's the Tree of Science, which he started writing in Rome in 1289 and finished a year later, Lull asserts that the principles of the general that form part of the moral conception of man are 9, and the rules are also 9. And he illustrates this with a table that contains the keys for the 9 letters which are placed around the circumference. The interesting thing about this table is that it shows the 9 vices of privation, or privations of good, that are found in the modern Enneagram. And on the right you'll see a modern version of that, in which the vices or the privations or the passions, as we would call them in the Enneagram of personality, are placed in that order as he placed them, not the same order as in the modern Enneagram of personality. The Society of Jesus was founded in 1540 by Ignatius of Loyola. The Jesuits, as the members of the society are known, were not just interested in spiritual matters, but also in studying the world around them, and this included being open to learn from sages of other faiths. They were renowned for their polished intellect, their involvement in social actions as well. So Jesuit philosophy stresses human liberty alongside the action of divine grace. That is, in order for us to rise above our passions and develop our virtues so that we can become true reflections of our divine origin, human effort is required. To do that, we need to develop the ability to step outside our ego passions and observe our conflicting emotions, and to learn to discern between the consolations felt when a genuine seeker is acting out of divine grace and the desolations that are felt when we've lost touch with divine grace. And divine grace is a key, often the third force of the law of three. The law of three, which I will talk about in my course, consists of three independent forces: the positive, the negative, or the active, and the resisting, and a third reconciling force. It is divine grace that is often the reconciling force, or at least some manifestation of it. And the Ignatian practice of the examen of consciousness is also a key practice that helps us to grow and evolve and develop as a human being, according to the law of seven. However, it is in the writings of the Jesuit Athanasius Kircher, 1602 to 1680, who was very strongly influenced by Ramón Lull, that we find another proto-Enneagram figure. It appears in his book Arithmologia Live de Audits. Sorry, I can't pronounce that properly. It was published in 1665, and here it is. So Kircher also took a great interest in Jewish Cabala, which I must turn to next.
One of the important symbols of Cabala is the Tree of Life. Now, the Tree of Life features in the second Genesis creation myth, that's Genesis 2 and 3, and in the final chapter of the Bible, Revelation 21. But the Tree of Life also appears in ancient Egyptian cosmology as the symbol of the divine feminine energy. We have already seen how Cabala's Tree of Life is based on Pythagorean sacred geometry. Although historically Cabala emerged in the 12th to the 13th centuries, Spain and southern France, it actually emerged from earlier forms of Jewish mysticism, according to traditional practitioners who believe its origins predate world religions in ancient Babylon and Egypt. As in the mystical numerology of Pythagoras, the numbers 1 to 9 are significant. So is the number 10, which symbolizes the cosmos as a whole. And there are 10 spheres in the Jewish Cabala symbol of the Tree of Life. So in order to manifest, the 1 appears as 3, a polarity, plus the relationship between the two poles. This is the Holy Trinity, numbered 1, 2, 3, which is the basis of all manifestation. And from 3 comes the 7, the latter signifying the 7 fundamental ways that the Holy Trinity can be manifested and made known. As, for example, in the 7 major colours of the spectrum of white light, or the 7 major notes of the octave of sound, of music. Thus, you can see that though the Tree of Life symbol in Cabala differs in shape from the Enneagram symbol, they share a common basic understanding of the cosmic laws that are also symbolized in the Enneagram. There is also the law of one represented by the circle in the Enneagram, but of course the circle here is the circle that encompasses the tree in the flower of life symbol. So these 10 spheres, or Sephiroth, are incorporated in the mystical symbol of the tree of life, and the tree consists of triads laid out horizontally. The basic triads are the intellectual triad, the emotional triad, and the instinctual triad, with a Sephirah above, the crown Kita, and below the manifestation Malchut. It's to do with kingdom, actually. And here again, the tree of life is simply a different way of symbolizing the same realities as that of the Enneagram, with 3 different centers. Each Sephirah, which is the singular of Sephiroth, can be described as a type of spiritual light, and as the revelation of an aspect of the Creator. And they are domains, if you like, of divine consciousness. So the mystical stream of Judaism saw each human being in essence as a spark of light emanating from one of these spheres. So there would be 9 of these, and the idea was that if you could discover which of the 9 spheres of the divine consciousness you emanated from, it would show you your divine purpose in life. It would reveal to you about your divine mission and help you to live in a way that is more aligned to God's plan for you. And by the way, the number 10 is the hub of the Enneagram circle, holding it all together like the spokes of a bicycle wheel. Well, that brings us to the end of this second video, when I've been tracing the development of the Enneagram symbol, particularly through the Middle Ages. And we're going to be jumping from, in the next video, to its development or rediscovery by Gurdjieff, and then its and how it developed and evolved in the 20th century. So that will be the final video in the series. See you then. Bye.